We live in a world where disappearing feels like rebellion. In a time where every thought is shared, every moment captured, and every presence measured by its online activity, the act of stepping back is treated like a failure. Society rewards the loud, the fast, the visible. But visibility is not the same as clarity, and presence is not the same as purpose. We've been conditioned to believe that if we are not constantly accessible, we'll be forgotten. But what if the real danger isn't being forgotten? It's never truly being known. Because as the Stoics teach us, he who is brave is free. And there is no greater act of bravery today than reclaiming your mind from a world that constantly tries to own it. Disappearing is not the loss of identity, it's the search for it. And in that silence, you don't fade, you sharpen, you strip away what doesn't belong. You confront the self without filters, without applause, without noise. And if you're walking this path of inner clarity and self-mastery, please subscribe to honor that quiet commitment you're making to yourself. This isn't entertainment, it's transformation, one silent step at a time. They tell you that being present is a virtue, that showing up, staying connected, keeping in touch, that's how you matter in this world. But no one tells you what it takes from you, what it drains. You wake up already feeling behind, like your life belongs to everyone else before it belongs to you. Your attention is hijacked the moment you open your eyes. Messages, alerts, silent expectations. You don't even get to choose who you are before others start asking for the version of you they remember. And so, you fall back into the character, the role you've been playing for years, friendly, productive, available. But deep down, you know something's off, because you can't remember the last time you felt like you belonged to yourself. Constant visibility might look like engagement, but it's often a quiet erosion of the soul. You are performing for the comfort of others while your real self waits quietly in the background, wondering when it will get its turn. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from being too available. It's not just physical tiredness, it's spiritual fatigue. You scroll through a feed of people pretending to be present, and you do the same. Not because you want to, but because you feel you'll disappear if you don't. If you don't show up, people forget. If you don't comment, they move on. If you don't respond, you become distant. So, you comply. You show up everywhere but in your own life. You laugh when you don't feel joy. You respond when you have nothing to say. You agree to things that feel misaligned just to avoid the discomfort of being misunderstood. And slowly, the walls of this invisible performance tighten around you. What looks like connection becomes a cage. What was meant to be communication becomes surveillance. But the moment you become aware of this weight, something begins to shift. You start to feel the cost of being constantly available. You recognize the addiction to validation dressed up as belonging. You begin to see how easy it is to lose yourself in the act of being liked. And here's where discomfort turns into awakening, because once you notice the weight, you can't unsee it. The tension between who you are and who you have to be becomes impossible to ignore. And it whispers to you, quietly at first, that maybe it's time to stop showing up for everyone else and start returning to yourself. Maybe stillness isn't laziness. Maybe unavailability isn't rudeness. Maybe disappearing just for a while is not abandonment, but the beginning of something far more sacred. It's tempting to believe that this kind of realization is selfish. But the truth is, when you are stretched thin across too many expectations, you lose your ability to be anything of depth to anyone. And worse, you lose your ability to be anything meaningful to yourself. You begin to live in reaction, not creation. Each interaction pulls you a little further from center, and after a while, you forget what that center ever felt like. The self becomes blurry. Your mind moves faster than your values. You answer questions you haven't had time to reflect on. You say yes because saying no takes more explanation than you're willing to give. In a world that glorifies quick replies and instant gratification, the greatest rebellion is taking your time. The greatest act of self-respect is to go quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're finally listening to yourself. Seneca once said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." But how can you know who improves you if you're always tangled in the noise? How can you know who you are improving into if you're always plugged into the expectations of others? Solitude is not absence, it's clarity. Disconnection is not rejection, it's preservation. And the idea that you must always be seen to matter is one of the greatest lies of modern life. You matter most when you are aligned, and alignment cannot be found in a world that constantly demands pieces of you. It's found in the silence you've been taught to fear. So the question becomes not whether you're showing up enough, but whether the version of you that keeps showing up is even the one you respect. Whether you're living a life you've chosen or simply maintaining a version of yourself that others are comfortable with. Because the world rarely encourages you to go inward. There's no applause for boundaries, no rewards for solitude, no medals for inner peace, but the ones who find the courage to go there, to confront that weight, to sit in it, and to finally lay it down, those are the ones who return with something real. And often they return quieter, firmer, less available, but more alive. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." You cannot master yourself if you are constantly being pulled by others. And so maybe it's not about cutting off the world completely. Maybe it's about reclaiming your sovereignty. It starts with turning off notifications without guilt, leaving messages unanswered until you're truly ready to respond, choosing depth over speed, choosing reflection over reaction. It's not dramatic, it's not even visible to others, but internally it's revolutionary. You begin to create instead of consume. You begin to speak from insight instead of impulse. And slowly, you begin to recognize yourself again, not the version others are used to, but the one you've longed to return to. The one who doesn't need to be seen to be certain. The one who knows that real power doesn't come from being everywhere. It comes from being fully rooted somewhere within. There's a strange kind of prison that comes with being known. Not truly known, but remembered. People don't see you for who you are today. They see you through the lens of who you used to be. And the problem is, you begin to respond to that image. You smile at the same jokes, play the same roles, slip back into familiar dynamics because that's what's expected. You perform out of habit. Even when you've changed on the inside, the world treats you like a still frame in a movie they've already seen. And slowly, that outdated reflection becomes a weight. A reminder that no matter how much you evolve, you're still trapped in someone else's story about you. That's the cost of being constantly perceived. It's not always painful. Sometimes it even feels comforting, reliable, familiar. But it locks you into a loop. You try to grow, but the moment you enter a room, you're pulled back into old patterns. A certain friend brings out the version of you who doubts everything. A sibling makes you feel like you're 10 years old again. A coworker jokes in a way that makes you second-guess your seriousness. It's subtle, but it's everywhere. These dynamics freeze you. They don't allow space for your transformation. And before long, you begin to wonder whether change is even possible if no one else is willing to acknowledge it. But the truth is, people will not always recognize your growth. Not because they're cruel, but because change challenges comfort. If you become someone new, they have to learn you again, and that requires effort. So instead, they hold on to the old version, the one that makes them feel certain, even if it no longer fits. But here's where the real problem begins. You start shrinking to meet their memory. You laugh at things that no longer amuse you. You stay silent when you want to speak. You avoid new ideas because you fear the reaction, and in doing so, you betray your own evolution. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming is not a performance. It doesn't happen on a stage. It happens quietly, painfully, and often away from the eyes of others. And that's the hardest part, because as much as you crave growth, you also crave recognition. You want someone to say, "I see you changing," but that rarely comes. More often, the world resists your growth. It treats your change as a threat. It mocks your seriousness. It dismisses your silence. It pushes you back into the mold you've already broken just to make itself comfortable again. And if you're not careful, you'll fall for the trap. You'll keep trying to be perceived a certain way, hoping that perception will one day align with who you are. But perception is projection. It belongs to others. You cannot control it. You cannot curate your way into selfhood. The more you try to be seen, the more you begin to fragment. You adjust your expression based on the room. You dilute your depth so it fits in a caption. You water yourself down just enough to be palatable, but every time you do that, a part of you disappears. Not in the transformative way, but in the tragic way. That's why perception is so costly. It doesn't just distract you from your path, it demands that you abandon it. It trains you to perform for applause rather than pursue alignment. You become addicted to being understood, even if that understanding is outdated or incomplete. But if your identity depends on being recognized, then you are no longer free. You are beholden to a mirror that lies, and the more you look into it, the more distorted you become. Seneca once said, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable, but your mind cannot remain unconquered if it's constantly bent toward pleasing the audience." The worst part is, you'll start to gaslight yourself. You'll feel moments of clarity, flashes of who you're becoming, and then dismiss them. You'll convince yourself you're being too dramatic, that maybe you haven't changed that much, that maybe the world is right about who you are. This is how you lose yourself. Not all at once, but in increments, in half agreements, in nods and smiles and silence that slowly erodes your sense of direction. And one day, you'll wake up and wonder where that emerging version of you went, the one that felt sharper, more honest, more alive. It didn't vanish. It was buried beneath the weight of being seen too soon by people unwilling to look deeper. But here's the shift. When you start valuing your inner life more than your outer image, you begin to break free. You stop needing to be understood. You stop needing to be approved of. You stop playing the role that everyone else wrote for you. And in that quiet defiance, something remarkable happens. You begin to live for yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a sovereign way. You reclaim the space to think your own thoughts, to feel your own feelings, to grow in directions no one expects. You become less predictable, less agreeable, but infinitely more real. That's when you realize that being perceived isn't the goal, becoming is. And becoming requires solitude. It requires withdrawal from the mirrors that distort. It requires the patience to be unknown for a while, maybe even misunderstood. Epictetus wrote, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." That's the cost. That's the toll. To become your truest self, you may have to let go of being perceived accurately, or at all. And yes, it's lonely. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But eventually, the discomfort turns into peace. You no longer chase clarity from others. You generate it from within. And in that clarity, you find yourself again. Not the self that pleases, the self that pulses, that aches to grow, that dares to detach from the narrative and write a new one, quietly, unapologetically, completely. This is where the real transformation begins. Not when the world sees you differently, but when you no longer need it to. when you stop asking for permission to become, when you stop shrinking to be understood, when you disappear from the eyes that hold you back and reappear only when you're whole, because no one else gets to define the limit of your becoming, and no one else should carry the weight of your truth. There's a strange narrative woven into the fabric of modern life, that silence means something's wrong. If you step away, people assume you're lost. If you stop updating the world, they wonder what happened. If you don't answer quickly enough, you're called cold, unavailable, maybe even selfish. And so, we stay plugged in, visible, audible, constantly performing our stability, even when our minds are crumbling beneath the surface. But what if the story we've been told about silence is completely backwards? What if stepping away isn't weakness, but the first real act of strength? The fear of disappearing isn't really about vanishing. It's about no longer being validated, because for so long we've equated worth with presence. If you're seen, you matter. If you're heard, you're relevant. If you're active, you're okay. But this obsession with proof has made us afraid of our own solitude, and yet solitude is where every true transformation begins. There's a courage in going quiet that most people will never understand. Not because they're incapable, but because they're terrified of meeting themselves without an audience. When Carl Jung spoke of the conscious descent, he wasn't referring to escapism. He wasn't talking about quitting life or avoiding responsibilities. He meant the deliberate, chosen act of stepping away from noise so you can finally confront what's underneath. It's a descent, yes, but not into chaos. It's a descent into clarity, a peeling away of all the masks you've worn so well that you forgot what your real face looked like. You don't descend because you're weak. You descend because you're done pretending to be strong for others while staying a stranger to yourself. It's not an easy path. In silence, the world no longer claps. There are no likes, no responses, no feedback loops. Just you and your mind. And at first, it can be deeply uncomfortable. Without distractions, your fears surface. Without applause, your insecurities speak louder. Without constant interaction, you begin to notice the noise you used to bury with activity. But that's where the beauty is born, because when you stop running, what chases you begins to lose power. When you stop proving, you begin to see what you actually believe. Silence doesn't empty you. It refills you, slowly, quietly, powerfully. Think of how many people live their entire lives reacting to messages, to moods, to trends, to expectations. Reactivity becomes identity, but when you retreat, you're no longer reacting. You're observing, you're noticing patterns, you're questioning reflexes, and slowly, without forcing it, you begin to choose differently. You realize how much of your life was shaped by others' assumptions and how little of it came from your own intention. In silence, you begin to take back authorship of your life. The myth that silence equals failure is just that, a myth. It serves those who benefit from your distraction, from your endless participation. But real life is not measured by notifications. Real evolution doesn't happen in public. It happens in the quiet choices, in the hard pauses, in the nights you sit with your discomfort instead of numbing it. It's easy to speak over your pain, much harder to listen to it. And it's in listening that you start to untangle what's yours from what was imposed. Sometimes, silence is the only way to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Sometimes, disappearing for a while is the only way to return as someone whole. And that return, it's never rushed. It's earned. You don't emerge with fireworks. You emerge with clarity, with boundaries that were born in stillness, with values that were refined in solitude, with a kind of presence that doesn't need to announce itself. It simply moves differently, speaks less, sees more. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And that wasting often happens in the endless noise we mistake for connection. We fill our days with everything but ourselves. And then we wonder why we feel so distant from our own lives. Silence isn't about doing nothing, it's about doing something sacred, rebuilding your inner world, one slow breath at a time, one clear thought at a time, one brave moment of not needing to be seen. This is not cowardice. It is power, the kind of power that doesn't demand attention because it's anchored, the kind that doesn't chase because it knows its own gravity. And when you've sat with yourself long enough, when you've gone quiet, not because you were broken, but because you were ready, you start to feel the shift. You don't rise to prove anything, you rise because you're whole, because the noise outside no longer outruns the clarity inside. Because the time in the dark made you sharp, not soft. And because you finally know the difference between who you were trying to be and who you actually are. There comes a moment when you realize that being constantly reachable isn't a badge of honor. It's a leak. Your presence has been diluted across too many people, too many platforms, too many expectations. And in that realization, something sharp cuts through the noise. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to soften your edges to make others more comfortable. You don't have to justify needing space to breathe. Strategic disappearance starts with reclaiming this truth. Your boundaries are not up for negotiation. Turning your phone off is not rude, it's responsible. Saying no is not selfish, it's honest. Choosing solitude isn't strange, it's necessary. There is a kind of power that grows in silence. It's not loud or performative, it's not theatrical. It doesn't announce itself. It just begins to solidify the moment you stop apologizing for not showing up to things that don't serve you. The less you explain, the more others are forced to reflect. Your silence becomes a mirror. People begin to notice your absence, not because you vanish dramatically, but because you no longer participate in the old dynamics. You become unpredictable in the best way. No longer bound by patterns, you reclaim your time and your choices. And in doing so, you shift the dynamic completely. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming truly yourself, requires a rupture with the outside world. He said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." Disappearing isn't about cutting life out. It's about pulling all your scattered parts back together, recentering. You disappear from noise so you can return to coherence. You stop performing to recover your presence. And when you do that, your life begins to reshape itself around your essence instead of your obligations. This kind of retreat isn't easy. It disrupts. It confuses people. It unsettles those who've grown used to your availability. And sometimes it even scares you, because when you say no, when you go quiet, when you withdraw your attention, you have to face the fear of being forgotten. But here's the truth. Being forgotten by people who only noticed you when you were useful is not a loss. It's a liberation. The right people don't need constant access to feel connected to you. They respect your rhythm. They don't take your distance personally because they know it's part of your growth. As you begin to disappear with purpose, you stop reacting to life and start designing it. You make choices instead of being pulled in all directions. You choose who has access to your time, your thoughts, your energy. Not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. You stop explaining your schedule. You stop validating your silence. And in that space, something powerful happens. Your life begins to speak for you. Your absence creates curiosity. Your quiet becomes substance. You're no longer proving your worth through constant output. You've already proven it by existing on your own terms. Disappearance, when done with strategy, is not an escape from reality. It's an elevation above it. You see things more clearly. You notice patterns you were too distracted to recognize before. You witness the pull of old habits and, for the first time, choose not to answer them. You become deliberate. Every yes is conscious. Every interaction is intentional. You don't disappear to disconnect. You disappear to reconnect more truthfully, to tune out the noise so you can hear your own signal again. This process doesn't come with applause. There are no badges for going quiet. No one congratulates you for walking away from the chaos. But in the silence, something far more valuable emerges. Peace. Not the fragile kind that breaks under pressure, but the kind that's built from deep internal agreement. When your outer life finally matches your inner values, the tension stops. The constant push and pull fades. And that stillness you were once afraid of becomes the very foundation of your strength. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." Strategic disappearance is exactly that. A quiet refusal to participate in what no longer fits. A calm detachment from the need to explain, to perform, to be liked. You stop being a character in someone else's story and become the author of your own. And the more you live this way, the more magnetic your presence becomes, not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because people can feel when someone is living with integrity. You don't need to be visible to be powerful. You don't need to be loud to be remembered. In fact, the most unforgettable people are often the ones who vanish for a while and return sharper, quieter, clearer. They speak less, but say more. They show up with a kind of presence that doesn't chase attention. It commands it. Because they've done the work that can only be done in solitude. They've disappeared not to escape life, but to meet it fully, without distortion. So when you feel the urge to step away, listen to it. Don't fight it. Don't explain it. Let the world spin without you for a while. It will. And when you return, you won't need to announce who you've become. They'll feel it, in your calm, in your clarity, in the way you no longer offer yourself where you aren't valued. Disappearance, when done right, doesn't make you invisible. It makes you undeniable. The world wants you reactive, because reactive people are predictable. They consume more, scroll more, doubt more. But a still mind, a focused mind, is dangerous in the best way. It notices, it questions, it creates. Reclaiming your attention is not just self-care, it's resistance. It's the quiet rebellion of choosing what enters your mind, what earns your focus, what deserves your energy. And the first step is to stop treating your mind like a hallway anyone can walk through. Start locking the doors. Start deciding who gets access. Start choosing silence over stimulus. You were not meant to live like this. Your mind is not a dumping ground for trends. Your emotions are not a reaction to every headline. Your thoughts are not just recycled opinions from people louder than you. But to rediscover what's truly yours, you need to go quiet. Not forever, just long enough. Long enough to remember what your voice sounds like without the echo of everyone else's. Long enough to observe your thoughts before they're hijacked by what's relevant. Long enough to choose boredom over distraction and find that boredom often leads to something better. Depth. That's where the real work begins. When the noise fades and all that's left is stillness. At first, it feels empty. That's normal. You've been filling every moment for years. Stillness is foreign, but it's in that unfamiliar space that something beautiful starts to emerge. Your own curiosity, your own questions, your own desire to build, to shape, to write, to make, to reflect. Creativity returns not because you forced it, but because you cleared the space where it could grow. You go from consumer to creator, from reflex to intention, from follower to thinker. And no, it's not glamorous. No one sees the effort it takes to sit in silence instead of reaching for your phone. No one applauds you for reading instead of scrolling. There's no viral moment in the discipline of daily self-mastery, but over time, the difference becomes undeniable. Your conversations deepen, your focus sharpens, your presence strengthens. You stop drifting through life and begin anchoring in each moment, not because you've removed every distraction, but because you've chosen not to give them your mind on demand. This doesn't mean you reject the world. It means you stop letting it dictate your thoughts. You become the editor of your inner life. You learn what to cut, what to keep, and what to let pass without reaction. You recognize the difference between noise and knowledge, between being informed and being overloaded, between staying updated and staying disturbed. And once you know that difference, you guard your attention like it's sacred, because it is. Seneca warned, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." And that is the state of most people's minds today, everywhere yet nowhere. Scattered across headlines, glued to reels, lost in updates that don't change anything meaningful. Strategic disappearance isn't just leaving people, it's stepping away from the systems that profit from your mental exhaustion. It's slowing down your mind enough to hear what's underneath the buzz, to confront what you've avoided, to notice what actually matters. You begin replacing consumption with reflection. Instead of binging content, you write. Instead of arguing online, you journal. Instead of reacting to the next big controversy, you build something that reflects who you are becoming. Your time becomes more than just something to kill. It becomes something to cultivate. And with that, you stop living at the surface. You begin to dive deep into ideas, into growth, into yourself. And this is the silent transformation. No one may notice at first, but over time, they will feel it. You won't respond as quickly. You won't be as easy to reach. You won't offer your opinion on every passing trend. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much to waste your focus. You've gone from being a byproduct of the feed to being the author of your life. And that shift changes everything. This is what reclaiming your mind really means. Not running away from the world, but meeting it with presence. Choosing what enters your consciousness, recognizing that not every voice deserves a place in your thoughts, and most importantly, realizing that your greatest power is not how much you know, but how clearly you can think. So, disappear. Not from life, but from the noise that keeps you numb. Step back, not to escape, but to refine. And when you return, return with a mind that is not just awake, but aware. That is not just full, but focused. That doesn't just react, but chooses. Because once your attention is truly yours again, so is your life. Disappearing is only the beginning, stepping back from the world, from its noise, from its endless demands. That's the easy part. What follows, though, is what truly shapes you. The silence that once felt peaceful starts to challenge you. The empty calendar, the unanswered messages, the slower mornings, they stop being symbols of freedom and start becoming mirrors. And this is where most people slip. They think pulling away is the transformation. But if you don't rebuild with purpose, the silence becomes hollow. Disappearance without direction is just drifting. It's not liberation, it's stagnation. There is a discipline required in solitude that few talk about. Not the discipline of routine in the external sense, but the internal discipline of staying with yourself long enough to see who's really there. The impulse will be to fill the time, to replace external chaos with internal busyness. But reconstruction isn't about staying busy. It's about staying deliberate. It's about learning how to choose again. Not react, not fall back into habits, but to build slowly, one conscious piece at a time. This is where you separate yourself from the person you used to be, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, private acts of realignment. When Carl Jung stepped away from the world and retreated to Bollingen Tower, he wasn't escaping. He was creating, stone by stone, journal entry by journal entry, walk by quiet walk. He built an environment that mirrored the psyche he was trying to understand. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't shared on a platform, it wasn't validated by others. And that's exactly what made it powerful, because growth that doesn't need to be seen is growth that lasts. The more you rebuild in silence, the stronger your foundation becomes. You're not sculpting an identity for others to admire. You're building a life you can quietly respect. And this work cannot be rushed. There's no shortcut to becoming. You wake up and you choose again. You read, not to impress, but to understand. You write, not to be read, but to explore. You walk without headphones, letting nature recalibrate the nervous system that's been overstimulated for years. You create routines, not to feel productive, but to feel grounded. These acts seem small, they're quiet, easy to overlook, but they carry weight. They're acts of devotion to a future self you haven't fully met yet. You begin to sense it, a shift in your breath, a firmness in your boundaries, a clarity in your intentions, and while the world remains loud, you no longer need its volume to feel alive. It's tempting to document the process, to prove that you're changing, to share the books you're reading, the thoughts you're having, the breakthroughs you've found. But something in you starts to resist that urge, because you realize that the most sacred things lose their power when exposed too soon. Some things are meant to incubate, to remain unspoken until they've matured into something solid. There's a dignity in privacy, a wisdom in keeping your evolution to yourself until it no longer needs defending. Plato once wrote, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself, and that victory is often silent." There will be days when nothing feels different, when the silence feels pointless, when your thoughts feel repetitive. But this is part of the reconstruction. The mind is shedding old layers. The body is detoxing from urgency. The soul is learning how to move without applause. You're not failing, you're recalibrating. And if you stay long enough in this in-between space, something begins to click. You no longer crave constant stimulation. You no longer check your phone out of boredom. You stop comparing, stop explaining, stop proving. You simply live. And in that quiet living, something remarkable begins to take root. Integrity. Your life becomes a reflection of your values, not your impulses. You start making choices that make sense to you, even if they confuse others. You're not rejecting people, you're just refusing to abandon yourself again. That's the difference between disappearing to escape and disappearing to evolve. One runs from discomfort, the other walks into it and builds a fire there. A place to stay, a place to work, a place to grow without the pressure of performance. And this is the sacred ground of reconstruction, where nothing is wasted and everything begins again with intention. You'll find that your new routines aren't rigid. They're alive. They flex with your energy. They evolve with your clarity. You don't follow them to feel worthy. You follow them to stay aligned. And in doing so, you begin to rebuild not just your habits, but your entire sense of self. One that doesn't shift with opinions, one that doesn't collapse under pressure, one that knows where it's headed, even if no one else sees the path. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one." Reconstruction is where you stop debating who you might become and start living as if you already are. Eventually, people may start to notice. They may comment on your calm, your presence, your focus. But by then, you won't need their recognition. Because you've already seen yourself, You've already earned your own respect. And that's a kind of confidence that doesn't need noise to exist. It's steady, it's quiet, it's earned, and it's yours. This is what the discipline of reconstruction is all about. It's the slow, intentional act of returning to yourself, not who the world told you to be, not who you were trying to impress, but the real you. The one who doesn't chase identity, but cultivates it piece by piece, privately, patiently, powerfully. There's something quiet and sacred about writing down your thoughts when no one else is watching. In a world that encourages you to speak before thinking, post before processing, and perform progress for the sake of applause, the act of writing privately feels almost radical. But this isn't about keeping a record of what you did today. It's not a recap or a checklist. It's something far deeper. A journal that doesn't serve your memory, but your becoming. A space where your raw thoughts, half-formed questions, and honest observations can land without judgment. It doesn't ask you to be polished. It only asks you to be real. This kind of journal isn't meant to tell the story of your past. It's meant to reveal the pattern of your future. Each word you write is a thread. At first it feels random, but as the pages fill, something starts to take shape. You begin to notice where your energy shifts. You see the loop of your triggers. You trace the subtle ways you've outgrown what once defined you. You catch yourself in the act of changing, not because someone validated you, but because your own words began to speak back. The journal becomes a mirror, not of who you were, but of who you're slowly becoming. The beauty of this process is that it demands nothing but honesty. It doesn't reward performance. It doesn't ask for poetic structure. It only asks that you pay attention to yourself, to your thoughts, to the quiet movements of your inner world. You write not to declare who you are, but to find out. Carl Jung understood the importance of this internal reflection when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Journaling is that bridge. It gives your unconscious a place to speak, and in doing so, it loosens the grip of old narratives. At first, it might feel like nothing is happening. You sit down to write and feel unsure of what to say. The page stares back blankly. But this discomfort is part of the process. You're learning to face yourself without distraction, without filters, without the need to entertain. And once you push through that initial stillness, something begins to flow. You'll write a sentence and realize it came from a place deeper than your surface mind. You'll read a past entry and feel stunned by the clarity you didn't know you had. The journal becomes a witness. It holds all the moments you would have otherwise forgotten, the quiet wins, the invisible battles, the mental pivots that slowly shaped your inner landscape. Over time, you start to develop a relationship with your journal that mirrors your relationship with yourself. You start asking better questions. You stop editing your truth. You begin to trust your own process. And because no one else sees these pages, there's freedom, no need to impress, no pressure to sound profound, just space to explore the depth of your own becoming. What you once feared would be chaos becomes a kind of internal order. What felt intangible becomes form, and that alone changes everything. The power of journaling isn't in the act itself, it's in what it reveals. You'll begin to notice when you're repeating old patterns. You'll catch yourself just before you make a decision that no longer aligns. You'll recognize the shifts in your language, the way your tone softens when you're healing, sharpens when you're ready to draw a boundary. These aren't loud changes. They're not the kind you post about, but they are real, and they are yours. They build the internal scaffolding for a life that feels true, not just successful. Writing in this way becomes a form of grounding. When the world feels chaotic or your thoughts start to spiral, the journal becomes a container. It doesn't solve your problems, but it gives them shape. And once something has shape, it can be moved, examined, shifted. You learn that emotions are not permanent, they're weather, that beliefs can be challenged, and even long-standing assumptions can dissolve under the weight of honest observation. You learn how to sit with discomfort and how to celebrate small breakthroughs, not for recognition, but for resilience. As you continue, the journal begins to reflect something more than just growth. It reflects devotion. The act of returning to the page again and again, even when you don't know what to write, is a declaration. I am committed to understanding myself, and that commitment matters. It rewires your sense of identity from the inside out. You stop looking for clarity in external opinions. You start finding it in the quiet lines of your own handwriting. Seneca once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Journaling makes this visible. You begin to see how often your mind creates unnecessary suffering. How many of your worries are patterns, not facts. How often you betray your peace trying to predict what hasn't even happened. And when you see it, you can shift it. You can rewrite the script. You can name the fear, and in naming it, you remove its teeth. There's something undeniably grounding about tracking your own transformation. Not because it makes you feel superior, but because it reminds you that growth is always possible, that no matter how many times you've fallen back into old ways, there's still a part of you reaching forward. The journal becomes evidence that even in silence, even when no one was watching, you were doing the work. You were changing. You were peeling back layers. You were building a mind that responds, not reacts. A heart that listens, not performs. A self that leads, not pleases. This quiet practice of writing, when done consistently, becomes a kind of internal compass. It reminds you where you started. It reveals how far you've come. And most importantly, it shows you that nothing is static, that even the parts of you that once felt stuck were never fixed. They were just waiting for your attention, waiting for your willingness to look at them clearly, without shame, without rush, without resistance. You don't need perfect words. You don't need answers. You only need presence. A few minutes each day, a small ritual of return, and slowly, page by page, something in you begins to solidify. Not in rigidity, but in truth. Not in ego, but in essence. And when that essence begins to rise to the surface, it changes how you show up in the world. Not louder, not brighter, but more anchored, more sure, more whole. And that is the kind of transformation no one can take from you, because it was built, word by word, in the dark, where all real things begin. There's a moment that comes, quietly and without ceremony, when you realize it's time to return. Not because the world has called you back, not because anyone asked, but because something within you has settled. Something that used to chase no longer runs. Something that used to tremble now stands still. You're not stepping back into the world to be seen. You're stepping in because you no longer need to hide. And what meets you isn't recognition, it's confusion. People look at you and something's different. They can't quite place it. You're familiar, but not the same. And that's not an accident. That's the point. You didn't just disappear, you evolved. While others were busy keeping pace with the noise, you slowed down. You paid attention to the things they kept avoiding. You felt everything you were told to suppress. You questioned what most people take for granted, and in doing so, you rewired the way you exist. There's no announcement for this kind of return, no dramatic transformation montage. It happens so gradually, so honestly, that by the time you emerge, you barely resemble the person who walked away. You've shed expectations like dead skin. The roles that once defined you now feel like old clothes you forgot you ever wore. The silence shaped you. It carved space inside your thoughts. It cleared the emotional clutter. It stripped away the parts of you that existed just to be liked. And now that you're back, the things that once made you feel seen no longer interest you. You're not more distant, you're just no longer tied to performance. You still listen, you still care. But your value isn't hinged on being understood anymore. The need for approval has dissolved, and what remains is presence. A grounded, quiet presence that speaks louder than anything you could ever explain. Some will misread it. They'll say you've changed, and they'll say it like it's a loss. They'll try the same jokes, the same stories, expecting you to respond the way you used to. But your laughter doesn't come as easily now, not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but because you've outgrown the rhythm. You're no longer dancing to someone else's beat. The humor that once masked discomfort now sounds hollow. The small talk that once filled silences now feels like noise. And what once bonded you now separates you, not with resentment, but with truth. There is a loneliness to becoming, a stretch of the path where your transformation alienates you from the very people who once felt like home. But that loneliness is not emptiness, it's alignment. It's a space that's being cleared for people who will meet you where you are, not where you were. And in that in-between, you learn to stand firmly in yourself. You stop explaining your shift. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop translating your silence into something palatable. And in that stillness, your power deepens. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." But knowing yourself changes everything else too. It makes shallow praise feel meaningless. It makes external validation feel small. You don't seek the spotlight anymore. You carry your own light. You walk into rooms differently. You say less but mean more. You don't need to dominate conversations to feel heard. Your energy speaks on your behalf. It's not louder, it's just unmistakably rooted. And that's unsettling to people who knew you when you were still bending to fit in. You've become a mirror, not in a way that flatters, but in a way that reveals. Your presence reflects back to others the parts of themselves they've yet to face, and that can be uncomfortable. Some will pull away, some will project, but others will lean in. They'll feel something in you they've been longing for in themselves. Stillness, sincerity, freedom from pretense. And it won't be your words that move them. It'll be your being, the quiet way you take up space without shrinking, the way you say no without flinching, the way your eyes don't scan for approval, they rest, unbothered, already full. What you've built inside can't be seen, but it can be felt. The hours of reflection, the pages of journaling, the moments of breakdown that became breakthroughs, those don't translate into small talk, but they radiate in your tone, in your timing, in your ability to remain still when others would panic. That kind of transformation doesn't need to explain itself. It just walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere. People might not understand it. They don't have to, because the return wasn't for them. It was for you. This isn't the part where you go back to how things were. This is where you carry your inner world with you into the outer one. Quietly, intentionally, without needing to prove or perform. You're not here to convince anyone that you've changed. You're here to live in a way that proves you no longer need convincing. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And that choice is no longer reactive. It's sovereign. It's steady. It doesn't beg to be seen. It chooses when and where to be visible. Eventually, the need to disappear fades. Not because the world has become easier, but because you've become more whole. You no longer have to leave to find yourself. You carry yourself with you wherever you go. The boundaries you once had to enforce now exist within you. The clarity you once had to search for now flows through your actions. You've returned, not as the version they expected, but as the one you were always meant to be. No longer diluted, no longer distracted, just present, rooted, free. This is the quiet return, not a comeback, not a reinvention, a revelation. And the world won't recognize you right away, but you'll recognize yourself, and that changes everything. The world may never understand the silence that shaped you, but you will carry its strength in everything you do. You didn't just return, you rose, clearer, quieter, unshakable. Watch the next video to continue your journey inward, and thank you.